They said she had the kind of presence you couldn't fake. Sun-kissed, driven, full of light. Audrey Griffin wasn't just another teenager from the Central Coast. She was a rising star, a surf lifesaver, honor student, and unapologetically alive in a world that often dims bright girls too fast. But on the morning of March 24, 2025, that light was found extinguished. Her body pulled from the quiet currents of Arena Creek, partially clothed, bruised, and lifeless. A vibrant young woman who'd gone out for a drink with friends and never came home. For days, police insisted there was nothing suspicious. No signs of foul play, just a tragic accident, perhaps. Misadventure. But that wasn't the truth. And by the time the truth came out, a month later, it would be too late for justice and too early for peace. Because the man who killed Audrey Griffin, he didn't even live to face trial. This is a story not just about loss, but about silence, system failure, and a chilling reminder that sometimes the most dangerous predators are the ones no one's watching. Welcome. This is Crime Uncovered, where every case has a story, and the truth is often stranger and darker than fiction. If you haven't subscribed yet, kindly do so to stay updated on the latest crimes we uncover. Let's get to know Audrey Griffin. Audrey was 19 years old. Born and raised on the Central Coast of New South Wales, she was the kind of person who made you believe in potential. She loved the ocean, not just to swim in, but to protect. By the time she was 15, she was already active in Iron Woman competitions and a regular on her local surf life-saving patrols. Friends called her grounded, focused, someone who had her life mapped out. She studied paramedicine at university, a field she chose not because it was easy, but because it was about helping people in their most vulnerable moments. That's who Audrey was. If she could do something for someone, she would, without asking, without hesitation. She was also close to her family, the kind of daughter who never went a day without texting her mom, who still hugged her dad before heading out for the night. That night, March 23, 2025, started like so many others. A Saturday, drinks with friends in Gosford, music, laughter, plans for the rest of the weekend, and then nothing, because somewhere in those quiet, early morning hours, something went very wrong. Saturday, March 23, 2025, was one of those warm, early autumn nights in Gosford, the kind where the air still smells like summer and the streets hum with low music and bar chatter. Audrey Griffin arrived with friends at a popular venue in the town center. She was dressed simply, black jeans, a fitted top, sneakers, comfortable, effortless. She looked like any 19-year-old enjoying her weekend, laughing, dancing, sipping a drink under the lazy neon lights of the coastal city. But something shifted in the early hours of Sunday morning. At some point, Audrey became separated from her group. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. Maybe she just needed some air. CCTV footage later showed her walking alone through Gosford around 1:30 a.m., heading south, in the general direction of Arena Creek. That was the last confirmed sighting of her alive. Her friends called her. No answer. Texted. Nothing. For a while, they assumed she'd gotten a ride home, or maybe crashed at another mate's place. But as dawn broke, worry set in. Audrey never went off the grid. By midday, her mother was calling hospitals. Her father was checking every known route between Gosford and home. Police were notified. A missing persons report was filed. But it didn't feel urgent. Not yet. To authorities, this looked like just another case of a young woman out late, maybe still with friends, maybe not. These things happened, they said, but they didn't happen to Audrey. Around 10:30 a.m. on Sunday, March 24th, a passerby noticed something in Arena Creek, not far from a quiet walking trail just outside the Gosford CBD. Floating near the reeds was what looked like a body. Police and emergency services arrived quickly, and within the hour, it was confirmed. Audrey Griffin had been found. She was partially submerged, partially clothed, and lifeless. The area around her, serene, silent, choked with mangroves, bore no signs of struggle. No blood, no screams heard the night before, just the soft rush of water moving beneath the bridge. Initial reports from authorities said there were no signs of trauma, no suspicious circumstances, and just like that, the case began to close. To the public, it looked like a tragedy. A girl who maybe slipped, maybe fell, maybe drowned. But Audrey's family knew better. Their daughter was a lifesaver. She had grown up in the surf. She could swim in open water, fight a current, hold her breath under pressure. She didn't just fall into creeks. Something was wrong. Something wasn't being said. And within weeks, everything would begin to unravel. At first, Audrey Griffin's death was handled like a sad but simple tragedy. A young woman found dead in a creek after a night out. No wounds that stood out. No gunshot. No screaming heard. Just a quiet recovery in the morning light and a muted explanation from the police. They logged it, filed it, labeled it non-suspicious. But the public wasn't quiet, and neither was Audrey's mother. From the moment her daughter's body was pulled from Arena Creek, she knew something was wrong. The idea that Audrey, a surf lifesaver, a water athlete, someone trained to keep others from drowning, had accidentally slipped into shallow water and died, it didn't add up. She had called Audrey's phone nonstop that morning, and when the news came, it didn't make sense. So she did what any mother would do. She pressed harder. Relentlessly, she demanded to know, where was Audrey last seen? Who had she spoken to that night? Were there cameras? Could they trace her steps? Had police checked her phone's GPS? Could they get footage from every street, every building, every bar? She wouldn't let up. Behind the scenes, police were slow to respond. The tone, at first, was dismissive, as though they were humoring a grieving mother instead of listening to someone who might be right. But she persisted. Daily calls, emails, physical visits to the station. She insisted they pull CCTV from the Gosford strip. Not just the bar entrances, but the street posts, convenience stores, bus stops. She asked them to map her daughter's movement second by second. And she asked the hardest question of all. How can you be sure this wasn't murder if you haven't even looked? While investigators publicly said little, forensic analysts were working in the background. Audrey's body had been transported for a postmortem, and what they found told a very different story from the one initially painted by police. There were bruises, faint but unmistakable, around her arms and, more disturbingly, her neck, the kind that form when someone is grabbed, restrained, or pushed. And beneath her fingernails, forensic teams made a discovery that changed everything. DNA, male, and not her own. Whoever had been with Audrey in those final moments. She had fought them. She had scratched. She had clawed. She had left behind a message in skin and blood, one that could still speak. It wasn't until Audrey's mother forced their hand, until she raised enough public attention and pressure, that police acknowledged the shift in direction. There was still no press conference, no headlines, just a quiet internal reclassification. What had once been death by misadventure was now under review as suspicious. Investigators returned to the CCTV footage, retracing Audrey's path from the club to the streets and toward the water. They gathered metadata, ping data from phones, witness reports, and device records. It was then that they noticed someone had been following Audrey that night. They sent the footage to the public for people to identify the man. When Torrens' ex-wife saw the footage, she went straight to the police to identify the man, and as well inform them of the threats she had received from him the night of the incident. It was Adrian Noel Torrens, 53 years old. No connection to Audrey, no shared friends, no family overlap. But his mobile phone pinged within 100 meters of Arena Creek at the exact window when Audrey vanished. It was the first physical link. The second came from the DNA beneath her fingernails. Lab results came back, and they were clear. It was his. Torrens had left a trace, and Audrey, even in death, had named him. But even then, the arrest didn't come immediately. It took time, nearly 4 weeks after her death, before police quietly moved in. On April 20th, 2025, detectives approached Torrens with a warrant. He was taken into custody and formally charged with the murder of Audrey Griffin. For most people on the Central Coast, the name meant nothing. Just another quiet man, middle-aged, scruffy, The type who slipped into shops without making eye contact. The kind of person you might overlook on the train or pass on a street corner without a second thought. But once he was arrested for the murder of Audrey Griffin, the question became impossible to ignore. Who was this man really? And what had led him to that creek in the early hours of March 24th? Torrens was 53 years old, unemployed, living alone in a rental property on the outskirts of Gosford. Neighbors described him as strange, withdrawn, and occasionally aggressive. One woman recalled how he'd screamed at a delivery driver for parking too close to his driveway. Another remembered seeing him arguing with himself in the middle of the street at night. But his quiet demeanor masked a long and disturbing history, one that, for years, had gone unchecked and unchallenged. Torrens wasn't a first-time offender. His name had appeared on multiple police incident logs going back over a decade. Verbal abuse, harassment, intimidation, stalking, property damage, domestic violence. His former partners had filed multiple AVOs, apprehended violence orders, against him, temporary restraining measures meant to keep him away after threatening or abusive behavior. In at least 2 known cases, women told police he had threatened to kill them. One said he had punched holes in her wall during an argument. Another claimed he had followed her for weeks after she left him. Despite these red flags, Torrens had managed to avoid serious jail time. Most charges had either been dropped, settled with warnings, or dismissed due to lack of evidence. He was the kind of man who knew how to stay just under the legal threshold, until the night he didn't. On the night of March 23rd, while Audrey Griffin was out enjoying an ordinary Saturday with friends, Adrian Torrens was unraveling. According to investigators, he had spent the evening repeatedly calling and texting his ex-wife. The messages weren't casual. They were unhinged, violent, and threatening. At least a dozen calls were placed between 11 p.m. and 1 a.m. Some went unanswered. Others were laced with verbal threats, including disturbing references to regret, revenge, and pain. In one of his messages, he wrote, "You'll see what happens when people don't listen." Another, "They'll feel it, just like you did." His ex-wife didn't respond, but she saved everything. Police would later retrieve those messages from her phone. Digital footprints of a man whose rage was boiling over. Some believe those threats weren't just about her. They were about any woman he could find that night. And Audrey was the one who crossed his path. By the time Torrens stopped calling his ex, it was nearly 1:30 a.m., the same time Audrey was last seen walking alone through Gosford's CBD, headed south. Her phone disconnected from a tower just minutes later, near the walking trail by Arena Creek. As here, police believe their paths crossed. There are no cameras on that stretch, no direct witnesses, but what followed left physical evidence impossible to ignore. Audrey's arms and neck bore signs of restraint. Her body showed bruises consistent with a struggle, and under her fingernails they found it, his DNA embedded deep, the result of a desperate fight for survival. When police arrested Torrens on April 20th, they didn't just charge him with Audrey's murder. They added 11 additional charges, all related to domestic violence incidents that had previously been minimized, ignored, or left unresolved. He had assaulted, harassed, and terrorized multiple women across years. And yet, he was free to walk the streets, free to follow a girl at night, free to corner her under the cover of dark. When Torrens was brought in, he said little. He didn't confess. He didn't deny. He simply refused to speak. But the evidence did the talking. CCTV, DNA, phone tracking, forensic consistency, behavioral red flags from past incidents. The case against him was mounting fast. The public hadn't even known there was a suspect until the New South Wales police made the announcement on April 20th. And by then, Torrens was already behind bars at Silverwater Correctional Complex. It was the beginning of what should have been a long, high-profile trial. But it never happened, because just 5 days later, everything ended, again. April 25th, 2025, was a quiet morning inside Silverwater Correctional Complex, one of the most heavily guarded prisons in New South Wales. The guards began their routine checks, cell to cell, face to face. But when they reached Adrian Torrens' unit, something was off. He didn't respond. He was lying still, unnaturally still, on the thin mattress of his isolation cell. Emergency services were called. CPR was attempted, but there was no pulse, no response. By 8 a.m., Adrian Torrens was declared dead. The man accused of murdering Audrey Griffin, the man whose DNA was found under her nails, whose phone pinged near her final location, whose arrest had brought momentary relief, was gone. Just like that. According to authorities, his death was not suspicious. No foul play, no external injuries. Suspected suicide, though the official cause was never confirmed publicly. He had been in custody for only 5 days. And now, the case would never go to trial. There would be no cross-examination, no confession, no official account of what really happened in those final moments by the creek. Audrey's family wouldn't get to look him in the eye. The community wouldn't get to see justice served. And the truth, whatever was left of it, died with him. For many, Torrens' death wasn't closure. It was a second tragedy, a theft of answers, a denial of accountability, a void that justice never had the chance to fill. Some called it a coward's escape. Others said the system failed again, first by not preventing Audrey's death, and then by allowing her accused killer to die before facing trial. In the days that followed, candles lined the banks of Arena Creek. Photos of Audrey, laughing, surfing in her Iron Woman gear, were placed beside notes that read, "Justice for Audrey. She deserved to grow old. Let her name be louder than his." But in a way it already was, because while the man who ended her life tried to vanish quietly, Audrey's name only grew louder. Audrey Griffin never got to finish her studies. She never got to run into the surf with her rescue board again. She never got to grow into the woman she was becoming, one built on compassion, discipline, and quiet strength. But her death didn't go unnoticed. If anything, it became a roaring demand for change. Across New South Wales and across Australia, people lit candles. They marched. They shared her photo. They shared their anger. Because Audrey's story wasn't just about one victim. It was about a pattern, a disturbing, familiar reality, that women are being harmed by men they don't even know, in places they should be safe. Beaches, parks, streets, creeks. It was about a police system that first said no signs of foul play, until it was undeniable. About a man with a history of violence slipping through again. And about a girl who did everything right and still ended up at the bottom of a creek. Politicians made statements. Activists wrote op-eds. Survivors told their stories. And in the middle of it all stood Audrey's family, grieving, but determined not to let her name be buried beneath silence. Thank you for watching. Every victim deserves their story told. If you found this story shocking and heartbreaking, subscribe to Crime Uncovered and help keep their memory alive. What do you think about Audrey's murder? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Until next time, keep questioning everything.